So this is an overview of the dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis of biological macromolecules. So to put away the overview, this all starts because carbon basically has 4 bonds that it wants to make in order to fulfill its total reactivity kind of tendencies. So it can create 2 double bonds, a triple bond and a single bond, or 4 single bonds. And oxygen has exactly half as many. It wants to make 2 connections with another atom, basically, in its valence shell electrons. And then hydrogen can give away one, or it can share or donate one, depending on the situation. So when you combine that with oxygen, and we are using this pen to represent oxygen, whether it has a sticky note on it or not, it is oxygen because it has 2 areas it can react with. So hydrogen only has 1, which is the pen cap, and if you connect it, you have a hydroxide group. Then, if you connect another hydrogen, you have 2 hydrogens and an oxygen connected together, which makes H2O, which is water, which is a huge part of the hydrolysis and the dehydration synthesis, is this water molecule right here. So, once we kind of look at that, for dehydration synthesis, what we do is we have the glucose molecule, which is a carbohydrate. It has mainly hydroxide groups, hydroxymethyl groups, and of course it has the carbon ring. I have the area on the bottom left, the bottom right of the glucose molecule, that hydroxyl group dashed, because later on we're going to see a zoomed in version of that specific one. So you can see the hydroxymethyl group is basically just a hydroxyl group and a methyl group combined together. So it's relatively simple, but it does look like a lot. Okay, so the other part that we need in this reaction is fructose. For this specific macromolecule that we are talking about today. And I've also dashed and outlined this hydroxyl group because that is going to be important for when we look at the reaction later. And the fructose is a lot like the glucose. It's got a bunch of hydroxyl groups and a couple hydroxymethyl groups, but then it has an oxygen in its carbon ring. Now we can blow up the illustrations I made, starting with the glucose on the left with the highlighted hydroxyl group, the fructose on the right with the highlighted hydroxyl group. Basically, those 2 groups are going to be involved in the reaction. So here we have the kind of the full picture. So that hydroxyl group from the fructose and that hydroxyl group from the glucose contain 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens between them. So what happens is one of the hydroxyl groups goes off, one of the hydrogens goes off, and then they combine together to create a water molecule. And then the free electron valence shell configurations on the other molecules want to create new bonds. And so they bond to each other. So to bring this back over to our pen sort of simulacrum, we have the hydrogen going onto the oxygen, which is the hydroxyl group from the fructose. It broke off, and then you have the hydrogen from the glucose, which is represented by this other pen cap, which broke off, and then it joins them and creates a water molecule. As you can see, this entire assembly is basically just a water molecule generated through this process. And then the resulting molecule, the product, creates a sucrose molecule. And that oxygen in the middle basically forms an ether group, which connects the glucose and the fructose molecule. And because they're connected together into a new macromolecule, it becomes, a new molecule called sucrose, basically. And then the same thing in sucrose can happen in reverse. So the sucrose, as represented by the glucose molecule as the circuit board on the left, and then the fructose, represented as the coil on the right, they are connected by this oxygen. And so what happens when the cell needs to break down the sucrose to create glucose and fructose, it does a hydrolysis reaction. And so this sucrose basically gets combined with a errand water molecule. The water molecule gets broken up, the sucrose molecule gets broken up, and then that oxygen goes in to make a hydroxyl group with the glucose, or a hydroxyl group with the fructose, and then the hydrogen goes off and bonds with the glucose.